Christopher Nolan is back with a brand new film. This time it's the true story tale of the evacuation of Dunkirk. It was at the start of World War II and basically 400,000 Allied soldiers are trapped on the beaches of Dunkirk in France. They're surrounded by German troops, and this film chronicles Operation Dynamo, and that is the evacuation of these soldiers off the beach. Like pretty much everybody else, I was excited for this film because of the director, Christopher Nolan. I've liked every film of his that I've seen so far, and Dunkirk, is this guy even capable of making a bad film? Seriously. Dunkirk was one hell of a cinema experience. Now, I didn't get to see it in 70mm or IMAX because I've got none of that near where I live, so I just had to see it on a simple, normal cinema screen, but it did not take away from the experience one bit. You've probably heard this in every other review and article talking about the film, but there are some things you should know about this film if you're planning on going to see it. The first one being, not a lot of dialogue in this film. There are bits of dialogue scattered throughout the runtime, obviously, but the film doesn't bog you down in dialogue exposition about what's going on. For all intensive purposes, it is a visual storytelling type movie. It lets the situation and the intensity of the situation speak for themselves. And some people are going to love that and some people are going to hate that. Me personally, I completely didn't mind. I would have liked to have had a little bit more dialogue in certain areas, but for the most part, it didn't bother me. Because like I said, it lets the situation speak for themselves, and some of the stuff that these guys go through in this film, or went through in real life, should I say, pretty damn intense. I would hesitate to call Dunkirk a war film because it's not really a war film. It's a survival story. It's a story about how these guys survived this situation. And Christopher Nolan's intentions for this film was to make it a suspense-driven film, and that's exactly what it was, and it works very, very well. I mean, it's one of those films where you're watching it and like you can feel it inside of you, and you just like that every time something intense is going down, and when it ends, you're like, ah. It builds up the suspense and it holds that suspense inside of you for a very long time. And when it lets go of the suspense, you take a breather, you're like, oh, thank God they got through that. And then you just hear in the background, in the film, another plane just slowly starting to come in and you're like, oh my God, it's not over. And then the chaos just re-ensues. One of the negatives I've seen a few people say about Dunkirk was the lack of characterization. And I understand where they're coming from. I really do, because there's no real characters that you really latch onto. There's not a lot of characterization in the film necessarily. But Christopher Nolan said in interviews that this was a suspense film. It's a film about the evacuation. The situation and the evacuation is kind of the character, if that makes any sense. And think about it like this as well. Some of the main characters in this film, like Harry Styles and Finn Whitehead, whatever the actor's name is, they're playing like 18-year-old guys who were, you know, drafted off to war, and they're like my age. I'm 19 years old, so it's pretty much like me or someone my age being in war, and they're just like scared out of their minds. And that's the part of the film that I kind of connected to, was putting myself in their shoes on this beach, surrounded by unseeable forces apart from the planes obviously, and then bombs are being dropped in, guns are being fired at you, and it was kind of scary at times. So it was one of those put yourselves in the character's shoe type films. I understand completely people who say the film doesn't have any characterization. I would have liked to have had a little bit more here and there, but for the most part I thought it worked pretty well for what the film was trying to be. Another small issue I had with the film was the perspective thing, where it has the land, air and sea perspectives, and sometimes the transitioning between the perspectives wasn't very smooth. For instance, it'll be concentrating on like Tom Hardy in the plane and it's daytime, and then it'll cut to like Harry Styles and all that lot on the boats and it's nighttime, and then it'll cut to Mark Rylance on his boat and it's daytime. It jumps back and forth like that only a couple times. I'm just like, okay, I'm starting to lose track of the time a little bit here. But in the end, Dunkirk was a really suspenseful and very intense look at a miracle, pretty much. Like at the end of this film, there were parts where I was getting goosebumps at some of the scenes. Yes, there's not a lot of dialogue and there's not a lot of characterization, but what Christopher Nolan wanted to do with this film is create a suspense film about a real life story, a story that surprisingly I knew nothing about until this film was announced, and now I'm very glad that I know about this story because it's one that really needed to be told. I'm glad it got the big screen adaptation it deserved, and I'm glad it was brought to us by Christopher Nolan, who's just a master at his craft, especially after seeing Dunkirk. I can't quite get it to a 5 because of the small little problems I do have with it, but Dunkirk is still one of the best films of 2017 so far, and I'm going to give it a 4.5 out of 5. So what did you think of Dunkirk, and how does it compare to other war films that you've seen? Whatever your thoughts are, let me know in the comments below, and if you want to see more of my stuff, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next video.